I'm Jenny Pape Carlisle, Curator of History at Aberdeen Art Gallery and Museums, and today I'm going to be talking about carte visite. So to start off with, I'll just talk a little bit about early photographic processes. The Victorian era was a great period of scientific discovery, and one of the most important developments was photography. Early photographic methods were based in metal and glass and later paper. However, the finished images faded very easily, and especially on metal and glass, were very expensive to produce. This is Joseph Nicephore Niepce, and he was born in France in 1865. He was particularly interested in the art of lithography, a form of printing that involves chemicals on a flat, smooth surface to transfer images. However, he was not particularly artistically blessed and relied on his son to draw the illustrations for him. When his son was conscripted into Napoleon's army, he experimented with a camera obscura to help him create images. The camera obscura worked by projecting an image through a small hole into a dark box or room, creating an upside-down projection. Niepce wanted to be able to capture the image on light-sensitive material, which would then etch the image for him. He started experimenting in this in 1816, as detailed in letters to his brother, which seemed to describe a black and white negative. In 1822, he created a contact exposed copy of an engraving of Pope Pius VII. However, the image was later destroyed when he tried to make prints from it. After much trial and error, he created the world's first surviving photograph in 1826. The image was created by coating a pewter plate in a form of bitumen and allowing it to develop in the camera obscura for 8 hours. This was then washed with lavender water and petroleum, revealing the image. The image was of a street scene seen from his studio window, and he named it View from the Window at Le Gras. You can tell the image had a long development time from the shadows in the image. You can see here that they're on both sides of the street. Niepce named his process heliography, or light writing. He tried to present his discovery to the Royal Society of London. However, due to various reasons, his work was not accepted. One of the reasons was that he refused to share the secret of how he had created the image with the committee. Niepce then began to work with Louis Daguerre to help refine the process. He passed away in 1833, and Daguerre continued on with the refinement of the process. Louis Daguerre had begun his career as an apprentice painter and then moved into the theatre, where he became a stage designer. He specialised in creating theatrical illusions such as the diorama. This was a massive painting on semi-transparent paper that could be cleverly lit to appear incredibly real to the audience. However, he became obsessed with creating an image that was more permanent. Louis Daguerre began working with metal plates. His photographic plates were copper coated in silver, which were then highly polished and fumed with iodide. The plates were then exposed in a camera obscura, or camera, for about an hour. The plate was then fumed with mercury and the image would appear. To help fix the image, it was treated with a solution of thiosulfate salt, also known as hypo. The result of this process was a positive image, and so it was not possible to create further copies from a daguerreotype. The surface of daguerreotypes was very fragile and they're easily scratched. They were often placed in special cases that prevented air getting to the plates. This was to help prevent tarnishing to the silver-coated plate, which would distort the image, and also to help prevent any scratches. Daguerre announced his invention in 1839. The news shocked William Henry Fox Talbot, who had been working on his own form of photography, this time based on paper rather than metal. Daguerre gave the process he had invented to the French government in exchange for an annual pension of 6,000 francs a year, and it was made free to everyone, apart from England. If you wished to produce a daguerreotype in England, you had to pay a fee. This would likely have been due to the rivalry between the two countries at the time. At first, the daguerreotype had limited commercial opportunities for photography, as exposure took up to 10 minutes. However, work continued on the daguerreotype, and by 1841, exposure time was reduced to 10 seconds rather than several minutes. William Henry Fox Talbot produced a negative image in 1835. He did not like using the camera obscura, and he worked with a local carpenter who created a smaller version for him. Fox Talbot believed that the smaller camera caused images to appear quicker. His first experiments involved silver nitrate and salt spread on paper. He then laid objects on the paper, for example, these ferns, and allowed these to develop in the sun. The area around where the object had been laid down would darken, creating a permanent image. However, this would also fade when exposed to too much light. He then created salted paper prints. These are permanent images. It was a similar process to his initial one, but the image was fixed with hypo to prevent it fading. They had a much softer look to them than the daguerreotypes, which were very sharp images. Fox Talbot then worked on the calotype. So this was working with silver iodide instead of halide, in a similar process to what Daguerre had used. He exposed the paper and then developed it out to produce the image using gallic acid. From this, he could then create negatives, and then once those were fixed with hypo, he could use those to create positive images. This is the standard of photography that was used pretty much until digital photography. All of these developments by Daguerre and Fox Talbot decreased exposure times and allowed portrait photography to become feasible. These developments were very exciting and quickly became a part of life for many ordinary people. Frederick Scott Archer invented the wet collodion process, which created a glass negative that could be used over and over again to create copies. This process again managed to cut exposure times. The technique was not patented, and so it was freely available and used by a great many photographers. So now I'm just going to talk about the cartes de visite themselves. Cartes de visite were patented in 1854 by André Adolphe Eugène Desideri. He patented a multi-lensed camera that allowed several small likenesses to be captured on one negative plate. The contact prints from this plate were then trimmed to 2.25 by 3.5 inches. These images were then pasted onto standard-sized card mounts to make them less fragile. And this is an example of a carte de visite camera, and you can see here the 4 lenses, which allow the multiple likenesses to be taken. Carte de visite are the most common surviving form of 19th century photography. Hundreds of millions were produced each year during the height of their popularity. These images are the same size as a calling card, giving them their name, but they were not generally used for this purpose. They were usually collected by family and friends and assembled into albums or put on display in specially made frames. They were the first photographs to be made en masse. A good professional carte de visite cost between a guinea for a dozen prints to half a guinea. It was possible to get cheaper ones, but they would have been of a lower quality and may have faded very quickly. It was very easy to reproduce these images from the negative plates, and so images could be produced in bulk. The carte de visite did take a little while to really take off. They didn't become popular in France until around 1859, when Napoleon III stopped off at Desideri's studio on his way to fight in Italy. They became increasingly popular in London in 1860 when the society photographer J.E. Mayall took a collection of photographs of the royal family. Prince Albert died just 6 months after this hand-coloured carte de visite was taken. His sudden death has been attributed to making collecting royal portraits even more popular. Queen Victoria herself had over 100 carte de visite albums of her own that she collected. Photographs made it possible for all tiers of the middle class to collect images of objects, people and places. Landscape photography was also very popular, especially Scottish landscapes. Photographers would produce images of important landmarks or key points along tourist trails. They were incredibly popular and available to a great many people. The advent of inexpensive photography really began to democratize the art of portraiture, allowing not just the wealthy to own accurate likenesses of their loved ones. The frenzy for collecting carte de visite was known as cartomania. Collecting carte de visite became very common as the process became more economical. People collected photos of their family and friends and placed them in impressive-looking leather-bound albums, often with heavy brass clasps. Some even had elaborately illustrated pages. They also began to collect cartes de visite of famous figures of the day, such as Queen Victoria, and also landmarks and landscapes, and even works of art. These cartes de visite allowed people to see what the celebrities were wearing. Newspaper photography was not yet readily available. These images are from an album that was given to John Brown's mother by Queen Victoria. Collecting cartes de visite was a way of the middle class stabilising their place in society by collecting images of acquaintance that they felt promoted the right images of themselves. The albums were also used as conversation starters, and visitors were encouraged to add their own carte de visite to the collections. Cards with short verses were made to encourage this. This is an example from our collections. What can carte de visite tell us about Victorian society? Photography was used by the middle classes to create a public image during a time of great mobility and change. Many wanted to emulate celebrated figures and ideals. Photography studios used props and backdrops to help create an idealized image of the sitters. Men and women are both shown in fairly stiff poses in domestic settings in many carte visites. Here you can see a few examples of men in their military uniforms celebrating their individual achievements. Photography did also allow women to be seen as individuals in their own right, rather than purely their husband's property. For example, we have these two women here dressed up, and it's giving them an opportunity to dress up and really play out their fantasies. In Victorian photographs, the sitters can often give the impression that they are pretty miserable. The photographic process was different to the instant images we're used to today. It took a long time to capture an image, and most people wouldn't have been used to staying still in a pose. Only the upper classes would have been used to holding a pose for a painter, so for many, this was a brand new, potentially quite uncomfortable experience. Early photographs show people formally posed as they would have been for a painted portrait. This was a service that they were paying for, and a lot of thought was put into how they wanted to be represented. These images were going to be displayed in the homes of their friends and family, so they really wanted to give the best impression possible. Smiles are quite unusual in carte de visite. Slower exposure times compared to modern cameras meant that holding a smile was uncomfortable, and any movement of the face would blur the image. Early photographic etiquette followed that of painted portraits, and as you can see here in this quote from Mark Twain, smiles were considered a sign of foolishness and frivolity. And I think you can really see that Mark Twain is living by his example. Props were used to help stop people looking so awkward. I think we can all sympathise with not knowing what to do with our hands when posing for photos. People were also strapped into stands to help them keep still, which is always going to look stiff. Here you can see a couple of examples circled. You can see at the gentleman's feet, there's the base of a stand, and then a lot more clearly, in between the toddler's feet on the table, you can see the stand that's helping keeping her in place. Children are also tied to chairs to keep them moving. Here you can see poor Katie Niven tied to a chair, looking deeply unhappy. You can just see that sash around her waist is actually going through the back of the chair. Something that I haven't been able to find in our collection, unfortunately, because I think it's a really interesting phenomenon, is this trend of invisible mothers. So here you can see two women who are covered in cloth holding children to help soothe them. So this is an example from another museum's collection. I think a lack of colour in carte de visite is something else that makes it hard to relate to, and maybe makes everyone seem as though they are always wearing black or dark colours. This example here is George Washington Wilson's daughter, Jeannie. And we know from an inscription on the back of the photograph that she's wearing a green silk dress. And this is the only example in our collection where we knew what colour that the dress should have been. Is it something that you think you would have a different impression of if you could see the really vivid colours that people were wearing? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we can use information we find on carte visite to help us date them. Carte visite are something that you very often find in old family photo collections. So it is quite helpful to look for these little tips and tricks to help date them. So these are the backs of the mounts that the carte would have been pasted onto. These carte mounts were usually personalised by photographers, and they had the branding of the studio along with any personal details. Throughout the late 1800s, these became increasingly elaborate with detailed information on them about the services that were offered by the studios. They would also advertise any prominent patrons. For example, when George Washington Wilson received the royal warrant, that's something that he added to the back of his cards. Earlier cartes visites had squared corners, as you can see from the one on the left-hand side, and then these quickly changed to rounded corners, you can see on the next two. But then in the late 1890s, it went back to sharper square corners again. And the studio details that you can find on the backs of these cartes can help date the carte visite as well, because the addresses would often change as the photographers moved maybe to larger premises as their business was doing better. And this is something that you can check against in post office directories, which are available online. The use of props can help us date carte visite and also tell us a little bit about what Victorians felt were important. Photographers competed with each other for trade. To encourage people to come to them, they would provide a range of backdrops and props. And these details can help us date the carte visite. For example, you can see here, these are two images from the 1860s. And the backdrops, it's quite plain. So what we've just got here is a heavy curtains, and then you've maybe got a column or a chair example there. So these would often be coupled with maybe other items of furniture, but as you can see, the backdrop itself is very plain with just that curtain sweeping down there. It's quite likely that, especially in the case of the male here, they're using that curtain to help cover the base of a stand. In the later 1860s, we can see these backdrops becoming a little bit more elaborate, and something that was particularly popular was a painted window showing a country scene. And then later in the 1870s, backdrops with very large rural scenes would appear. So these were supplied ready-made, and the same scenes can often be seen in several studios because artists were producing them and then selling them on. Garden furniture and styles were often used in conjunction with these scenes. And in the summer, some of these shots might actually have been taken outside in the photographer's garden. Here you can see this group example on the right-hand side there that's clearly been taken in an actual outdoor setting. This quite elaborate balcony scene is from George Washington Wilson's studio, so it's a very popular studio and they had more money to invest in these quite elaborate props. I'm hoping that the baby on the left-hand side has been secured in some way because she does look quite precarious. As I mentioned earlier, props would be used to help people feel more at ease and have something to do with their hands. Fans and books were quite popular options. You can see here these two gentlemen, one holding a book and the other holding a letter. Books as well would also be used to indicate that the individual was studious and intelligent. Small children were often stood on chairs or stools, and this was partly so that the photographer wouldn't have to adjust the height of the camera as much in between clients, giving them more time to get multiple clients in through the day. Photographers would keep toys in the studio to help put kids at ease when they came in, and you can often see these in the photographs. So obviously this little toot on the left-hand side is probably not playing that trumpet, but it's just giving them something to be more at ease when they're sitting by themselves. And here you can see a couple examples of family photo shoots. So obviously the children are a little bit more at ease with a whole group. But you can see in the image on the left-hand side there, the boy's still got a toy. He's got a hoop there to keep his hands busy. In the 1870s and into the 1880s, more elaborate items were used for people to lean on. So you can see here these two ladies are using this quite elaborate planter to help them keep their poses still. We've got some quite elaborate chairs and stools for these gentlemen, and some more padded chairs here. So the exposure times were still about sort of 10 seconds, which is a long time to hold a pose for. And this is why having either a clamp or a piece of furniture to help steady your pose is such a common sight in a lot of these cartes visite. And again, it's why so many of the subjects aren't smiling, because it is a very unnatural feeling to hold that pose with your face for so long. I'm just going to very briefly talk a little bit about how we could use people's appearance in carte visite to help us date them. I'm not going to go into great detail on this topic as it's a huge area that would have a talk all to itself. And if it's something that you're interested in, I would really recommend having a look at the Victoria and Albert Museum's website. They've got a great range of resources to help you date your own carte de visite if you find any at home. So some aspects that you can see in carte de visite that can help you date them is looking at hairstyles, looking at jewellery. You can see quite a lot of jewellery in the example on the left hand side there. Looking at hats. And then looking at silhouettes of dresses is probably one of the biggest indicators. So here on the left hand side you can see it's a very, very large skirt with a crinoline under it, and this would probably indicate a quite early carte de visite, probably late 1850s, possibly 1860s. And then here on the right hand side you can see the standing woman's skirt is much, much tighter and will have a bustle at the back, which you can't see in this image, indicating that it would be a much later date than the other image. Unfortunately, it's much more difficult to tell these date changes with men because the changes in clothing are much less dramatic than they are with women. The next big thing after the carte de visite was the cabinet card. So these became popular later in the 1860s. So they're extremely similar to the carte de visite, but just come in a larger format. Many of the photographic albums that we have in our collections have slots for both carte de visite and cabinet cards. The larger and slightly more expensive cabinet cards would be used for images that were maybe more precious to the owners. And to finish up, I'm just going to talk a little bit about arguably Aberdeen's most famous photographer, George Washington Wilson. So when photography first became accessible, it was obviously wildly popular, and studios sprang up all over the country, including here in Aberdeen, to meet the demands. George Washington Wilson was born in 1823, and he studied art in Edinburgh and London, and then returned to Aberdeen around 1849, and he began a career as a portrait miniaturist. And we do have a self-portrait of Wilson in our collections. In 1852, Wilson had entered into a partnership with the photographer John Hay Jr. on Crown Street. His prestigious West End locations really helped cement George Washington Wilson as a respected photographer, and his business quickly grew. Wilson is considered to be one of the great pioneers of photography, and he developed many techniques that were used outside of the studio. As the years went on, he became increasingly involved with landscape photography and also produced stereoscopic images. Here you can see a few of the montages that Wilson created. He created this novel effect by cutting and pasting small portraits into an oval shape and then re-photographing the collage. Many of these images are the great and the good of Aberdeen at the time. From 1854 to 1855, Wilson had secured a contract to photograph the royal family alongside the construction of Balmoral Castle. He was granted the royal warrant in 1861 and used this to further advertise his business. By 1867, there were 18 photographers registered in Aberdeen, but Washington Wilson remained the most successful. He produced this short booklet to help advise people on proper etiquette in the photography studio, and I think this just really shows how novel a process this was to some people who hadn't been used to posing for paintings or photographs before. I quite like this little booklet. I think it's quite an insight into photographers at the time. When you read through it, you see that he's really in there saying, I am not a bad photographer, you are a bad sitter, and has a short discourse here that you can see between the lady and the photographer, talking about issues that have obviously come up frequently in the studio, that the photographers are probably sick of correcting and just want to have it out there before everyone comes in. They've got it outlined how they think the process should go. Wilson passed away in 1893, aged 70, and his business passed to his three sons, Charles, Louis, and John Hay Wilson. While the University of Aberdeen is well known for their very impressive George Washington Wilson collection, we at Aberdeen Art Gallery and Museums also have a large collection of George Washington Wilson photographs and glass negatives, including many carte visite that were produced by the company. Wilson also photographed his own family, and you can look at his children in particular and document their growth into adulthood through these images. The Aberdeen Art Gallery and Museums collection is quite particularly rich in examples of these family photographs from the Wilson family. To finish up, I just want to have a really quick look at the lighter side of Carte de Visite. So although the examples that I've shown you from our collections, they all look quite stern, serious portraits, but Carte de Visite were also displayed humorously. So we have these great examples here taken by photographer Harry King in the 1880s in Brighton, and I just love this collection of extremely grumpy looking cats attending Mrs. Tabby's tea party and little pickles coming out of his tin. So that's all from me on the subject of Carte de Visite. I just want to say thank you so much for listening to my talk about Carte de Visite. If you have any further questions about our Carte de Visite collection, or indeed any of our photography collections, please do get in touch with me on the email address on the screen just now, and I'd be happy to talk about our collections further. And I lastly just want to encourage people to have a look on our website, and you can look through the Carte de Visite collection on there. And we do also have our George Washington Wilson archive available as open data for you to look through. And again, if there are any questions, please contact me. Thanks again for your attention.